Imagine you're settled in your first-class seat, ready for a long-awaited flight. You've been dreaming about this trip for months, but then out of nowhere you're asked to leave your seat, not because of anything you've done, but because of who you are. In a world where power dynamics often go unchallenged, one woman's quiet resilience would turn the tables. What started as a humiliating flight altercation would soon lead to Ashley's downfall and Serena's rise to an unexpected level of influence. And in just 7 minutes, the airline would never be the same again. But first, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more interesting stories. The airport buzzed with the usual pre-flight chaos. Hurried voices, rolling luggage, and the hum of overhead announcements. Serena Montgomery, however, moved with the quiet assurance of someone who was used to being in control. Tall, with a confident stride that turned heads even in a crowd, she was a woman who made her presence felt without uttering a word. Her tailored black blazer clung to her form perfectly, accentuating the sharpness of her features. Her skin, a rich, smooth bronze, glowed under the terminal lights. Her hair, pulled back into a sleek bun, framed her face in an effortless elegance that was both powerful and poised. Serena was not just any lawyer. She was a civil rights powerhouse with a reputation that extended far beyond the courtroom. She was well known for her work in holding powerful corporations accountable, making sure that those in positions of privilege never forgot their duty to those they often overlooked. Her connections ran deep, sometimes too deep, and she was regarded with a mix of admiration and fear in both legal circles and beyond. Despite her success, Serena never felt the need to flaunt it. She was a woman of subtlety. That was her strength. As she entered the first-class check-in line, a wave of nostalgia washed over her. This flight was a necessary trip, one more battle in the ongoing war for justice. New York would be her battlefield this time, and though it was not her first time on a private jet, the rush of adrenaline that came with knowing the stakes always found its way into her chest. She took her boarding pass from the agent with a polite smile, her sharp brown eyes scanning the crowd without pause. She didn't have time for distractions today, not with the fight ahead of her. She was here for business, and nothing was going to divert her from her mission. After breezing through security and customs, she made her way to the gate, where she found the usual mix of first-class passengers already gathered. Serena settled into a plush seat, checking the time on her sleek gold watch. The flight was delayed by 15 minutes, nothing out of the ordinary, but her mind was already focused on what was coming next. As she took her seat on the plane, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice from behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am, but this seat is not yours." Serena didn't immediately turn. She simply took a deep breath, mentally preparing for the confrontation that would soon follow. Serena turned slowly in her seat, the calmness in her expression belying the brewing storm inside her. Standing in the aisle, clipboard in hand, was the flight attendant, a young woman, probably no older than 25, with sharp blonde hair and the kind of beauty that might turn heads in a magazine ad. She wore her uniform like a badge of authority, but her gaze, cold and unyielding, immediately made Serena's muscles tense. "I'm sorry, but this is a mistake," the attendant Ashley Corbin said, her tone too sweet to be genuine. "This seat is reserved for someone else." Serena raised an eyebrow, her voice steady. "I believe you are mistaken. This is my seat. I checked in, and my boarding pass clearly shows that." Ashley's lips tightened, her eyes flickering over Serena, sizing her up. Serena could tell she had already made a judgment that had nothing to do with the seat or the flight, and everything to do with who Serena was. A black woman, dressed well, sitting in first class, no doubt a source of irritation for someone like Ashley. Serena had experienced it before. The quiet sneers, the covert looks that said you didn't belong. "You'll need to move," Ashley said, her hand now on the back of the seat. "I'll call someone over if you refuse." Serena didn't move. "I'm not refusing, but I will not be bullied." Ashley's lips curled into a tight smile, almost as if she thought Serena would break under the pressure. But Serena remained unyielding, her posture poised. There was a simmering quiet confidence about her that made it impossible to underestimate her. "Please," Serena said softly, "let's not make this any more complicated than it needs to be." Ashley glanced around nervously, sensing the weight of Serena's composed resolve. The murmurs of passengers grew louder, a few of them noticing the exchange. But as the tension hung thick in the air, Ashley's eyes flashed with irritation. She wasn't going to lose this battle, not in front of a crowd. With a quick nod, Ashley turned and walked away, only to return moments later with the supervisor. Serena remained seated, calm and unflinching, as the conversation that would change everything continued. Ashley returned with a manager, an older man whose uniform seemed as though it had been carefully ironed to perfection. His face was stone unreadable as he addressed Serena directly. "Ma'am, I understand there's been a misunderstanding," he began, his tone more formal, more conciliatory. "However, the seat you're occupying has been reserved for a passenger who is boarding shortly. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to vacate the seat." Serena tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Reserve? For who?" "I was seated by your staff." The supervisor cleared his throat, glancing at Ashley, who was now watching Serena with a look that suggested satisfaction. "I apologize for the confusion, but we must abide by the seating arrangements," the supervisor said. "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." The manager's words were laced with authority, but Serena could hear the underlying condescension. She knew what was happening now. This wasn't a simple mix-up. It was deliberate. Ashley had decided that Serena didn't belong in first class. She had made the call to make her leave. Serena's gut told her it was because of who she was. "I see," Serena said, her voice steady. "I'll leave quietly, but don't mistake my silence for agreement." The supervisor didn't respond immediately, looking almost relieved that she wasn't causing a scene. Serena stood and grabbed her bag from the overhead compartment. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, but as she walked past Ashley, she allowed herself to meet the flight attendant's eyes, a silent challenge passing between them. As Serena moved toward the back of the plane, a passenger near the front stood up, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair. He was watching the scene unfold with narrowed eyes. He looked at Ashley, then at Serena, his gaze hardening. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice booming across the cabin. "I couldn't help but overhear, but this is absurd. Why is she being asked to leave?" Serena paused mid-step, her back still turned, but she could feel the heat of his gaze on her. Ashley froze, her face flushed with embarrassment. "It's a simple misunderstanding, sir," she stammered. "No, it's not. That's racial discrimination," the man shot back, his voice now carrying weight. "I've been flying for years, and I've never seen anyone treated like this." There was a moment of silence before murmurs spread through the cabin. A few other passengers were now looking on, some shaking their heads, others watching in disbelief. Serena could hear the low rumblings of the crowd, the atmosphere shifting. It was as if the power dynamic in the room had changed. She didn't need to speak for them to see what had just happened. The supervisor, noticing the rising tension, stepped forward. "Sir, we don't want any trouble here," he said, trying to quell the growing unrest. Serena, feeling her heart beat faster now, gave the man a small nod of appreciation, but she didn't engage. She kept walking, her head high, as she made her way to a seat at the back of the plane. She could feel the eyes on her, the weight of the injustice pressing in from every side. But there was no turning back now. She had to let this play out. Serena sat down in the last available seat in the back of the plane. The flight was about to take off, and the final announcements began to echo through the speakers. She adjusted her seatbelt, her mind still focused on the encounter. She had complied with their demands, but inside, something had shifted. She looked out the window, watching as the plane began to taxi toward the runway. The sounds of the engine revving up were a steady hum, a comforting noise in a moment that otherwise felt like the beginning of a storm. Her fingers tightened around the armrest, But there was nothing more to be done now. The situation was out of her hands. But she was going to make sure it wasn't the end of the story. The plane lifted into the air, and Serena sat back in her seat, her eyes narrowing. She had played her part, quietly and without fanfare. But this was far from over. It was only just beginning. What would happen next? Only time would tell. The hotel room was sleek, modern, and bathed in soft, muted tones of beige and ivory. Serena Montgomery stood by the large windows, looking out at the New York skyline as the sun dipped below the horizon. A few moments of quiet before the storm, before the battle she knew was coming. The city was alive, vibrant, almost pulsing with energy. But all Serena could think about was the moment on the plane, the injustice that had been done to her. She set her phone on the marble countertop and dialed Evan Richards, the senior executive at the airline who was also a close, trusted colleague. Evan had been in her corner for years, someone who understood the intricacies of power and how to wield it with precision. If anyone could make this go away or turn it into something much bigger, it was him. The phone rang twice before Evan answered. Serena. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. What happened? Serena's fingers tightened around the phone, but she kept her voice even. I was removed from my seat today, Evan. First class. A flight attendant, Ashley Corbin, decided that I wasn't supposed to be there. She's already caused enough trouble. Evan paused for a moment, the weight of what Serena was saying settling in. I'm sorry, Serena. I should have seen this coming. This isn't just about a seat. You know what this is about. Serena exhaled slowly, her eyes fixed on the glowing cityscape. I know exactly what it's about, and I'm not letting this slide. You need to make sure that this is dealt with. I'll handle the rest. Leave it to me, Evan said, the certainty in his voice unmistakable. I'll talk to the board directly. We'll make sure that everyone knows this isn't something that will go unnoticed. Serena nodded, even though Evan couldn't see her. Good. Let me know when you've taken action. She hung up and stood still for a moment, the gravity of her next step sinking in. It wasn't just about correcting an injustice. It was about showing the world that she wouldn't let anyone think they could walk over her. She had the power to make the tables turn, and she intended to do exactly that. Meanwhile, back on the plane, Ashley Corbin was in her element. The cabin was calm now, the passengers settling in as they prepared to disembark. But Ashley was far from finished with the power she felt she'd wielded over Serena. As she walked down the aisle, she spoke in hushed tones to her fellow flight attendant, Natalie. Can you believe that woman? Ashley scoffed. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I had every right to ask her to move. She was clearly in the wrong seat, and who else was going to handle it if not me? Natalie looked around nervously, her eyes darting to the passengers, unsure whether Ashley's tone was too loud. I don't know, Ashley. It seemed like she was just sitting in the seat assigned to her. Maybe it was just a mistake. Ashley rolled her eyes, waving a dismissive hand. Please. She didn't belong there, and I made sure she knew it. She was probably one of those types who think they can get away with anything because of who they are. But not on my watch. I'm not going to let anyone walk all over me. Natalie bit her lip, hesitating before speaking. But don't you think there might be consequences? I mean, she seemed like she had connections. Maybe someone important. Ashley laughed, her voice dripping with condescension. Oh, please. A woman like her? She's just another troublemaker. She'll forget about it once she realizes that I'm the one in charge. But as Ashley spoke, she failed to notice the passengers around her, the whispers that had begun to spread. She didn't see the eyes that were already beginning to judge her, nor the few passengers who had overheard her words. She wasn't as untouchable as she thought. Serena was no troublemaker, and certainly not someone who would quietly let this pass. But Ashley, for the moment, remained blissfully ignorant of the storm she had unknowingly started. Serena had made her way to the hotel in one piece, but her mind was still reeling from the events of the day. As she stepped out of the elevator and into the hotel lobby, she could feel the tension in the air, but nothing prepared her for the encounter that was about to unfold. A white police officer stood near the entrance, speaking to one of the hotel staff members. His broad shoulders and stiff posture screamed authority, but there was something about his expression, something distant and cold, that set off an alarm in Serena's mind. As she walked past him, heading for the lobby's quiet seating area, the officer's gaze snapped to her. He eyed her up and down, his stare almost calculating. Then, without warning, he approached. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone authoritative. "I need to speak with you." Serena stopped, surprised but not visibly shaken. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I've been informed that you caused a disturbance earlier today," the officer said, his words deliberate, his eyes scanning her face. "Apparently, you made a scene on the plane." Serena raised an eyebrow, her lips curling slightly. "A scene? I was simply seated in my assigned place." The officer's jaw tightened, but he pushed on. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you to come with me. You've been reported for disturbing the peace." The words were sharp, cutting through the otherwise calm atmosphere of the lobby. Serena felt a wave of frustration roll through her. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about a disturbance. It was about making her out to be the troublemaker. "No," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." The officer took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have a choice." Serena stood her ground, every inch of her body communicating her resolve. "I'm not going anywhere until I speak to the hotel manager, and I'm sure you'll find that I was the one who was wronged." For a moment, the officer hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But Serena could see it. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who was so calm and composed. His hand twitched toward his radio, but before he could make another move, the hotel manager appeared at his side. "We don't need this, officer," the manager said, his voice placating. "I'll handle this. She's a guest here." Serena's eyes met the officer's for a brief moment before she turned, walking away without another word. She had just faced down the man who had tried to undermine her, and she wasn't about to let anyone else push her around. The storm was coming, and she was ready for it. Serena paced the hotel room, her phone in hand. The incident with the officer had shaken her, but she wasn't about to back down. If anything, it had only hardened her resolve. She'd already begun the process of building her case, knowing that what had happened wasn't just about one incident, it was a pattern of behavior. And now, it was time to take it further. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a call from her lawyer, James Miller. She answered, her voice cold but controlled. "Serena," James said, his tone low, "I've spoken to a few people at the airline. They're already trying to downplay the situation, but it's clear that this isn't going away. You have the power to escalate this." Serena's pulse quickened, the possibilities opening up before her. "What do you mean?" "You can go straight to the board of directors. You don't have to settle for some minor internal review. If you want to make them listen, this is the way." A small smile tugged at the corner of Serena's lips. "Then let's make them listen." As the words left her mouth, she knew that the tables were about to turn. The storm was no longer brewing, it was about to hit full force. The weight of the day still hung in the air as Serena settled into the leather armchair by the window. The city lights outside seemed brighter now, as if reflecting her simmering determination. She opened her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, then typed out a series of calculated emails. Each was addressed to the right person in the right position contacts she knew wouldn't ignore her call. A knock on the door pulled her from her focus. She stood, smoothing the creases in her tailored blouse as she crossed the room. When she opened the door, a courier handed her an envelope marked with urgency. Serena signed for it, her curiosity sharpening as she shut the door behind her. She opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the contents. It was a copy of the incident report filed by the airline, something her lawyer had promised to send. But as she read, her brows furrowed. The report painted her as disruptive, difficult, and entirely in the wrong. Words like uncooperative and belligerent leapt off the page, twisting the truth beyond recognition. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't let the anger consume her. This wasn't new. She had seen it before, words weaponized to diminish, to silence, to shift blame. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a video call from Evan Richards. She swiped to answer, and his face filled the screen, his expression grim yet resolute. "I just got off the phone with the board," he began without preamble. "They're aware of the incident, and they're scrambling to figure out how to handle it. But Serena, they're nervous. They know who you are, and they know what you're capable of." Serena allowed herself a small smile, though her voice remained measured. "Good. They should be. This isn't about me, Evan. This is about making sure no one else goes through this. They need to understand that." "They're going to try and play it off as a misunderstanding," Evan said, leaning closer to the camera. "But here's the thing: you've got leverage. The other passengers? Some of them have already started speaking out. Social media's catching on." Serena's gaze flicked to her laptop, where notifications were beginning to pop up. Videos, tweets, and posts were spreading like wildfire, many of them condemning the airline's actions. One video, in particular, caught her attention. A passenger from the plane had recorded the confrontation with Ashley. The video clearly showed Serena remaining calm, while Ashley's dismissive tone made the situation worse. "Have you seen this?" she asked, sharing her screen with Evan. He watched the video in silence before nodding. "This changes everything. With this kind of evidence, they'll have no choice but to address it publicly. But Serena, you need to be ready. They're going to come at you hard. I've been ready for years," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of all the battles she had fought before this one. "This isn't their narrative to control. It's mine." Evan hesitated, then gave her a small nod of approval. "All right, I'll keep the pressure on my end. Just know that you've got people in your corner." The call ended, and Serena leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with possibilities. The storm was no longer brewing in the distance. It was here, and she was at its center, ready to direct its force wherever it needed to go. Her fingers tapped out one final email, this time to her lawyer. She attached the video, along with the incident report and her own statement. The subject line was simple but powerful: escalation. She clicked send, her heart steady, her mind sharp. Outside, the city lights continued to glow, oblivious to the upheaval that was about to shake the foundations of an entire corporation. The night was far from over, and Serena was just getting started. The moment Serena's name hit the headlines, the storm escalated. The story, initially a local ripple, had now become a roaring wave. News outlets scrambled to cover the details of a powerful lawyer advocating for a civil rights victim of racial discrimination by an airline employee. The words felt like a series of blows to Serena's chest, but in a good way. Every broadcast, every tweet, every comment only strengthened her cause. She leaned back in her office chair, staring at her phone screen as it buzzed nonstop. Calls from clients, allies, even strangers who recognized her name from the news. But the messages she truly wanted were from the airline's top brass. That was yet to come. Evan Richards had called her that morning, his voice steady but tinged with excitement. "Serena, this is bigger than we thought. The board is on edge. They're scrambling to get ahead of this." Serena had known it would escalate, but even she couldn't have predicted the velocity of the media storm. She sat up straighter, adjusting the collar of her jacket, her sharp features betraying no hint of the anxiety many would have felt in her shoes. Serena Montgomery had never been one to fear a battle. She had built her reputation as a force to be reckoned with, and now the world was watching. Outside her hotel window, the New York skyline spread out like a battlefield. Serena closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself in the knowledge that she had prepared for this moment her whole life. This was the very reason she dedicated herself to the pursuit of justice. The injustice, the prejudice, was nothing new, but now she had the power of the public on her side. Her thoughts were interrupted by another call. It was her publicist, Lydia. "We've got a problem," Lydia said, her voice urgent. They're starting to paint you as an opportunist, exploiting this for publicity. Serena chuckled, shaking her head. Let them. The truth has its own way of coming to light. I've got people spinning the narrative in your favor, but we need you to stay poised. Don't engage with the trolls. Serena glanced at the flurry of negative comments already flooding social media. Poised. That's what I do best. But behind her calm exterior, she felt a twinge of satisfaction. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who'd ever been pushed aside because of their skin color, their gender, their background. This was bigger than one woman's fight. This was the tipping point. She wasn't going to back down. Across town, Ashley Corbin sat in her small apartment, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Her phone was silent, but the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders. The video had gone viral, and it felt as though her world was collapsing in on itself. Her social media had exploded with a mix of support for Serena and condemnation of her actions. Messages flooded her inbox, some hateful, some questioning her character, but none of them offering an ounce of sympathy. Her friends, the ones who had once adored her glamorous life as a flight attendant, now seemed distant, almost embarrassed to associate with her. Ashley stared at the news clips, her fingers scrolling aimlessly through her Instagram feed. She could almost feel the eyes of the world on her, waiting for her to make a move. A few days ago, she had been a star in her small social circle, the perfect combination of beauty and privilege. But now, she was a villain in a story that had already been written, and she was powerless to change the narrative. A knock at the door pulled her out of her reverie. It was Tyler, one of the officers she knew from the precinct, a friend she'd known for years. He stepped into the apartment, his broad frame filling the doorway. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, careful. Ashley's eyes flickered up, the irritation clear on her face. "Why wouldn't I be?" "You've seen the news, right?" Tyler asked, sitting down on the couch, his tone serious. "Of course I have," she snapped. "What do you think?" "I'm not stupid." He let out a heavy sigh. "Look, I know you didn't mean for any of this to happen, but it's bad, Ash. People are asking questions. Your boss is already talking about a public apology." Ashley's heart skipped a beat. "I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do." Tyler leaned forward. "I get it, but if you don't, you might lose your job. It's bigger than you think." The word stung, but Ashley's pride was an immovable wall. She wasn't going to bend. Not for anyone. "I didn't do anything wrong," she repeated, though the doubt was starting to creep into her mind. Serena sat across from Evan Richards in the private conference room of her office, the tension between them palpable. The air was thick with strategy, each word spoken measured and deliberate. "I've got a plan," Evan said, his voice steady as always. "We need to go beyond the airline. We need to make this a larger issue. Systemic racial discrimination in the corporate world." Serena nodded, her gaze sharp. "I agree. This isn't just about me or Ashley. It's about the culture that allows this kind of behavior to persist unchecked." Evan leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "We've already got a groundswell of public support, especially from the Black community. But we need the media on our side, the right outlets, the right influencers." "I've already started contacting people," Serena replied, her tone cool. "We need to leverage this moment, push for policy change, demand accountability from the airline, and from every other company that operates like them," Evan added, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "You've got the right angle. This could be the start of something huge." Serena's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no joy behind it, only purpose. "It will be. But first, we need to make sure Ashley understands the consequences of her actions." Late that evening, Serena received an unexpected call. She was in the middle of drafting a statement when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered. "This is Serena Montgomery," she said, her voice steady but curious. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a man's voice, gravelly and full of authority. "Serena Montgomery, huh? I'm one of Ashley's colleagues. You've made quite the name for yourself. Let me give you a little piece of advice. Back off. This whole thing is getting out of hand. Don't escalate it any further." Serena's grip tightened on the phone. "And if I don't," she asked, her voice ice cold, "then you'll regret it," the voice growled. "We have ways of making people like you disappear." Serena took a deep breath, her mind already racing through the legal implications and the avenues she could pursue to track down this cowardly threat. She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. "I'm not backing down," she said firmly, her words a promise. The line went dead. Serena sat still, her eyes narrowing as she set the phone down. This was far from over. Serena stood by the window, her eyes scanning the horizon as the sounds of the city pulsed around her. The call from Ashley's colleague had been threatening, but it only strengthened her resolve. She was more than just a lawyer. She was a force to be reckoned with, and no one would intimidate her. Her phone buzzed again. It was from Evan. "We've got a meeting with the airline's board tomorrow. They're looking to settle, but they want to avoid making it a public spectacle." Serena smirked, a flash of steel in her eyes. "No, this isn't about a settlement. It's about making them pay for their actions." Publicly, Evan hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get the team ready. We'll make sure they don't have a choice." Serena looked out over the city once more, her voice low and deliberate. "They don't have a choice." Serena entered the executive suite with the same calm intensity that had earned her respect over the years. The polished wood floors, the sleek furniture, and the glass walls that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, all of it was meant to impress. But for Serena Montgomery, none of it mattered. What mattered was the man sitting behind the enormous desk, Harold Banks, the CEO of the airline. He was tall, imposing, with a square jaw and the kind of gray hair that spoke of years spent at the top. His sharp suit matched the cold precision of his demeanor. Banks rose as she entered, extending a hand, but there was no warmth in it. "Serena, I'm glad you could make it. Please, take a seat." Serena didn't shake his hand. She didn't need to. She knew the game he was playing, the one where power dynamics were always in his favor. But not today. "I won't take much of your time, Harold," she said, sitting down without a hint of hesitation. Her voice was steady, calculated. But there was an undercurrent of something sharper, a quiet strength that could slice through the layers of corporate indifference. Banks didn't seem fazed. "Of course. We both know why we're here. I assume you're ready to discuss the terms of the apology and the compensation." Serena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Compensation is not what I'm here for. Apology, yes. But there's something else that's far more important." Harold raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not entirely moved. "Go on." Serena leaned forward slightly, her posture straight. "I want mandatory sensitivity training for all your employees, starting with those at the top, the ones who are so quick to dismiss complaints from people like me. And I want this to be part of your public apology. You're going to address the culture that allowed this kind of behavior to fester within your company." Banks' smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough for Serena to notice. "That's a bold request, but I'm not sure the board will be receptive to such a drastic move." She met his gaze, unwavering. "If you want this to go away, it's the only option. I've already spoken to several key media outlets. The public is demanding accountability. If you don't act, this will become a crisis you can't control." There was a silence that hung between them, thick with the weight of her words. Banks opened his mouth to speak, but Serena was already rising from her seat, signaling that she was done negotiating. "I'll give you 48 hours to make a decision," she said coolly. "I won't wait any longer than that." Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, leaving Harold Banks to stare after her, his expression unreadable. The room was smaller than Serena had imagined, almost suffocatingly intimate for a conversation that was about to reshape everything. Ashley sat on the opposite side of the table, her hands tightly gripping the edges of her chair. She had been told this meeting was non-negotiable, that it was the only way to salvage what remained of her career. But the reality of facing Serena Montgomery in person was far worse than she had anticipated. Serena entered with the same controlled poise, her gaze scanning the room for a split second before settling on Ashley. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a quiet intensity that made Ashley feel small. For a moment, she felt as if she were a child being reprimanded by a teacher. "I'm here to give you the opportunity to apologize," Serena said, her voice calm but laced with power. "Not for me, Ashley, but for everyone else who has faced the same kind of treatment you put me through." Ashley shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The weight of the moment was suffocating. She had expected this meeting, but now that it was happening, she realized how ill-prepared she was. I never meant to hurt anyone," Ashley began, but her voice faltered. She had rehearsed this, practiced the words in front of the mirror, but now they seemed hollow. Serena didn't speak, just watched her, waiting for more. The silence was suffocating, and Ashley could feel her face flushing with embarrassment. I was just doing my job," Ashley continued, her voice rising slightly in desperation. "I didn't think it was that serious. I didn't think—" Serena's interruption was gentle but firm. "That's the problem, isn't it? You didn't think. You didn't stop to consider the consequences of your actions. And you certainly didn't think about how your behavior was rooted in something far deeper than just doing your job." Ashley's chest tightened as the realization hit her. Serena wasn't just here to accept an apology. She was here to make Ashley confront her own prejudice. I didn't think it was about race," Ashley stammered, her eyes searching Serena's face for a trace of understanding. But Serena's expression remained unchanged, almost unreadable. "That's exactly why we're here," Serena said, her voice low but steady. "You didn't see me as a person. You saw me as a problem that could be dealt with by simply removing me from the situation. That's the very definition of prejudice." Ashley opened her mouth, but no words came out. The weight of what Serena had said crushed her, and she finally understood just how deep the issue ran. Serena stood up, her gaze never leaving Ashley. "I suggest you take some time to think about this. And when you're ready to truly apologize, to make amends for your actions, we'll talk again." Without another word, Serena turned and walked out of the room, leaving Ashley to sit in the uncomfortable silence, her mind swirling with guilt and realization. Ashley's mind raced as she replayed the conversation over and over. How had it come to this? She had always seen herself as fair, as someone who would never discriminate. But the truth was undeniable now, and it gnawed at her insides. She had been part of something far bigger than her own ignorance, something insidious that had been woven into her thoughts without her even realizing it. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Her makeup was smudged from the tears she had fought to hold back during the meeting. Her eyes were swollen and her hair, once so perfectly styled, now hung in disarray. She had tried to hold her composure in front of Serena, but the truth was, she had been ashamed. Ashamed of the way she had acted, ashamed of her own blind spots. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and Ashley picked it up without thinking. It was a message from her boss. She opened it, her heart sinking with every word. "We need to talk. It's getting worse. We expect an official apology. Publicly." Ashley's hands shook as she set the phone down. How could she apologize when she wasn't even sure who she was apologizing to? What had she done that was so wrong? But then she remembered Serena's words. "You didn't think," and suddenly, Ashley realized just how deep the problem went. This wasn't just about her. It was about the system. It was about years of ignorance, of assuming that people like Serena were somehow different, less deserving of respect, less deserving of basic human decency. Serena met with her team late that night. The city outside was quiet, the lights flickering in the distance. but the room inside the office was filled with a hum of intense conversation. "We need to push harder," Serena said, her eyes sharp as she surveyed the group. "We can't let this die down." "Not yet." Evan nodded, his fingers drumming on the table. "The CEO is still wavering. They're trying to buy time." "They won't have time," Serena replied, her voice low but resolute. "The public has already chosen sides. Now, it's up to us to make sure they don't have a choice but to do the right thing." The room fell silent as the team absorbed her words. There was no room for doubt anymore. They were in this to win it, not just for Serena, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. Serena stood up and moved toward the window, her silhouette outlined against the city lights. "Tomorrow we go public. We're taking this to the press. And once we do, we don't stop until the change is real." Ashley stood by the door, her hand resting against the cold metal. She had come to Serena's office, hoping for a final chance to make things right. She had rehearsed her words over and over again, trying to find the right way to say it. But when she stepped forward, Serena was already walking away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. There was no time for more words, no room for more apologies. Serena didn't even look back. She kept walking, the door closing softly behind her, leaving Ashley standing alone with the heavy weight of her guilt. She had tried, but she knew it was too late. The sun hung low in the sky as Serena strode into the conference hall, the echo of her heels against the polished floors bouncing off the walls. She had never imagined herself in this position, a leader in the fight for racial justice, a public figure who had gone from being a victim to a beacon of change. The media coverage had been relentless, and yet Serena handled it with a grace that only those who had endured adversity could truly understand. She was dressed simply, but it was clear from the way she carried herself that she commanded respect. Her black dress flowed just below her knees, the fabric swishing with every step, and her deep brown skin glowed under the fluorescent lights. Her hair, styled in soft waves, framed her sharp features, and her eyes, steady and unwavering, spoke of a woman who had seen far too much and yet refused to bow down to it. As she approached the stage, she was greeted with applause from the audience. She raised a hand in acknowledgement but didn't smile. She wasn't here for the accolades. She was here because people needed to hear what she had to say. The microphone crackled as she spoke, her voice cutting through the chatter of the room. "When I boarded that flight, I didn't know what would happen. What I did know was that I had every right to be there. I was paying for a service, just like anyone else. But the truth is, I wasn't just dealing with an unfortunate incident. I was facing a system that didn't see me as equal, didn't see me as human. And that's something that, too often, women like me experience in silence." The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. Serena's message was simple but powerful. Racial discrimination wasn't a problem of isolated incidents. It was a structural issue that needed to be confronted head-on. And she was willing to lead that fight. As the applause rang out, louder now, Serena couldn't help but feel a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She wasn't doing this for the praise. She was doing this for the thousands of people who had experienced the same things she had. People who hadn't had the platform, the strength, or the voice to fight back. But now they did. Serena took a deep breath and left the stage, her mind already on the next step. This fight was just beginning. The training room was stark, clinical, a far cry from the luxurious boardrooms Ashley was accustomed to. She sat in a small plastic chair, surrounded by others who had been forced into sensitivity training after the scandal that had rocked the airline. Some were quiet, their faces red with embarrassment, while others fidgeted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the whole process. Ashley, however, felt a different kind of discomfort. She wasn't just embarrassed. She was confused. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in, her breath shallow as the facilitator began discussing the history of racial discrimination. The words hit her in ways she hadn't expected, stirring something deep inside her, a twinge of guilt, of recognition. "This isn't just about being nice," the facilitator, a middle-aged woman named Monica, said. her tone firm but compassionate. This is about understanding the systems of power and privilege that allow discrimination to persist. It's about acknowledging that we, as individuals, can contribute to or challenge these systems. But first, we have to recognize our own biases. Ashley shifted in her seat, her mind racing. She had never thought about it this way. She had always prided herself on being open-minded, on treating everyone equally. But now, as Monica outlined the various subtle ways racism manifests in everyday life, Ashley felt the weight of her own blind spots. "I never saw it like that," she whispered to herself, but the words felt foreign. She had always thought that if she didn't say the words, if she didn't actively participate in discrimination, then she was free from it. But the more she listened, the more she realized how wrong she had been. She was no longer the confident, untouchable woman she once had been. The idea of systemic injustice, of the way people like Serena had been treated for years, was beginning to sink in, and Ashley wasn't sure how to process it. She hadn't just been a passive participant in the system. She had been part of the system itself. The session continued, but Ashley's mind was elsewhere. Her world had just tilted, and she had no idea how to find her footing again. The press event was meant to be a straightforward conversation, a chance for the airline's leadership to show they were taking action. But as soon as Serena entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just a press conference. It was a battleground. Serena stood at the front, calm and poised, as reporters' cameras flashed around her. She had spoken at enough of these events to know that this was her moment, and she wasn't about to waste it. The airline's new CEO, a man in his late 50s with a permanent frown etched into his face, stood beside her. But it was clear who the spotlight was on. Serena took a breath and began, her voice steady but filled with quiet authority. "We've reached a turning point," she said. "What happened to me on that flight wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a result of a system that allowed discrimination to thrive unchecked. And I'm here to make sure that it changes." The reporters scribbled in their notebooks, eager to capture every word. Serena's presence was magnetic, drawing people in. She wasn't just a victim of discrimination anymore. She was a voice of an entire movement, and they were listening. Just as Serena finished speaking, Ashley entered the room, her face pale, her body tense. She'd been asked to attend the event, and though she didn't want to be there, she knew it was part of her journey toward redemption. She had been given a platform to speak, to defend herself, but she wasn't sure she could. When the microphone was passed to her, she hesitated. The reporters turned their cameras on her, and for the first time in her life, Ashley felt small. She wasn't the powerful executive anymore. She was the person who had hurt someone else. And now she had to explain why. I want to apologize for my actions," she began, her voice faltering. "I didn't fully understand the impact of what I did, but I'm learning, and I'm committed to doing better." But Serena didn't let her off the hook. She stepped forward, her eyes sharp as she addressed Ashley. "Your apology doesn't mean much if you don't understand the underlying problem. This isn't just about one person's mistake. It's about the system that allowed it to happen." The reporters murmured in agreement, and Ashley felt her words crumble in her mouth. Serena had turned the tables. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Serena wasn't just confronting her now. She was schooling her in front of the entire world. After the press event, the headlines were everywhere. Serena Montgomery leads a charge for racial justice in the airline industry. The stories were filled with her quotes, her strong, unwavering words that had sent a message not only to the airline, but to anyone who would listen. Serena was no longer just an activist. She was a symbol. In contrast, Ashley was everywhere too, but not in the way she had imagined. The media coverage was harsher, more critical. "Ashley Green apologizes, but is it enough?" one headline read. Another asked, "Can a public apology undo years of ignorance?" It was all too much. Ashley could feel the weight of the judgment pressing down on her, suffocating her. She had wanted to make things right, but every step forward felt like it was met with 2 steps back. She had never been prepared for the scrutiny, the constant judgment from both the public and her peers. She spent her days in the office, barely able to focus on her work as the phone calls came in some supportive but most critical. She had expected people to forgive her, but it was clear that forgiveness wasn't something she could demand. It was something she had to earn, if it was even possible. And then one afternoon, a call came in from Serena. Ashley stood in her office, staring at the phone in her hand. Serena's name was on the caller ID, and for a moment, she didn't know what to do. The last time they had spoken, the tables had been turned in front of the world. It had been humiliating, but it had also been a wake-up call. Ashley answered the phone with a shaky breath. "Serena, I've been following your progress." Serena's voice came through calm, steady. "I can see that you're trying, but this isn't going to be easy. You've got a long road ahead of you." Ashley's throat tightened. "I know," she said, barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did." Serena's voice softened just a little. "The road to redemption isn't straight, but it starts with understanding, and you're doing that. Keep going. I'll be watching." As the call ended, Ashley sat back in her chair, the weight of her past actions heavy on her shoulders. For the first time, she didn't feel like the victim anymore. The road ahead was uncertain, but won. The cold morning light filtered through the curtains as Ashley sat at her kitchen table, her fingers lightly tapping on the ceramic cup in front of her. It had been weeks since the press event, since everything had shifted. The initial flurry of media coverage had died down, but Ashley's internal storm was far from over. She had never thought of herself as a racist. The idea felt absurd. Something other people did, those ignorant, small-minded people who couldn't see beyond the color of someone's skin. But now, as she stared down at the remnants of her coffee, she had to admit something to herself. It wasn't about intent. It was about the system. It was about the things she had failed to see, the things she hadn't wanted to see. A knock on the door snapped her out of her thoughts. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Her mentor, Clara, stepped inside, her presence a welcome interruption. Clara was an older woman, gray streaking through her dark hair, her features sharp but soft with age. She had been one of Ashley's first supporters when she'd started her career in the airline industry, a woman who had seen her potential. But today, Clara's gaze was different. There was no admiration there, only the weight of expectation. "How are you doing, Ashley?" Clara asked, settling into the chair across from her. Ashley exhaled, her shoulders sagging. "I'm trying, Clara, but it feels like I'm never going to get it right." Clara didn't speak right away. Instead, she studied Ashley, as if deciding whether to push or wait. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but firm. "You need to confront it, Ashley. You can't just apologize and expect everything to change. You have to actively fight your own biases." Ashley's lips pressed into a thin line, the weight of Clara's words sinking in. She had thought that if she admitted her mistake, if she showed remorse, that would be enough. But Clara was right, this wasn't just about making an apology. It was about doing the hard work of changing her mindset, and that wasn't going to happen overnight. "I don't even know where to start," Ashley said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Every day feels like I'm doing the wrong thing." Clara leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Start by listening. Start by understanding. The work is messy, but you need to be willing to get your hands dirty. And don't expect it to be easy, because it won't be." Ashley nodded slowly, her mind reeling. She didn't have all the answers. She wasn't even sure she had the right questions. But she had to try. For herself. For the people she had wronged. The rooftop of the downtown hotel had a view that could take anyone's breath away. Serena stood at the edge, gazing out over the city, her fingers curling around the railing. The city below was a maze of light and sound, but up here, everything felt calm, detached. Luca Thornton, the man who had invited her here, stood beside her, his posture relaxed but confident. He was tall, with dark hair neatly styled, his tailored suit giving off an air of sophistication. His sharp blue eyes contrasted with his easygoing demeanor, a subtle magnetism in his every move. "You're quiet tonight," Luca remarked, his voice smooth like silk, but not without an edge of curiosity. "You usually have a lot to say." Serena glanced at him, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe I'm just enjoying the silence." Luca chuckled softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Fair enough, but silence can only get you so far. At some point, you have to speak up." Serena felt a warm spread across her chest at the intensity of his gaze, though she quickly brushed it off. She wasn't here for that. She wasn't here for any distractions, especially not from someone like him. Luca Thornton was powerful, successful, and undeniably attractive. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the work ahead of her. "I think the world is finally starting to listen," Serena said, her voice quiet but sure. "And it's about time." Luca nodded, a glint of respect in his eyes. "I think you're right, but there's still so much to be done, and I believe you're the one who can make it happen." Serena raised an eyebrow, studying him. "And what makes you think that?" Luca took a step closer, his presence undeniably commanding. "Because I've seen what happens when someone like you decides to take charge. You don't just talk about change. You make it happen." There was a moment of tension, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Serena could feel at the pull of his words, the magnetic energy between them. It wasn't just admiration. It was something more, something that made her heart beat a little faster. But she wasn't ready for that. Not now. Not when she had a mission to complete. The next week, Serena and Luca met at a sleek downtown cafe. It was small, intimate, just the kind of setting that allowed them to discuss business without distractions. Serena was dressed in a sharp blazer and trousers, her look polished, her demeanor professional. Luca, ever the businessman, was in a dark navy suit, his sleeves rolled up slightly as if he were ready for action. Serena took a sip of her coffee, watching Luca across the table. She had known from the moment they'd met that there was something magnetic about him, but today, it wasn't just chemistry. They were discussing it with strategy. "So, what's the plans?" Serena asked, leaning forward slightly. Luca placed his cup down carefully, his fingers brushing the edge. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, the need for real change in the travel industry. And I believe we can make it happen. Not just through words, but through action. We should create a nonprofit organization that tackles racial discrimination at its core." Serena's eyes lit up. "A nonprofit? That could change everything. But we need a lot of backing. Money. Influence. We can't do this alone." Luca smiled, a glimmer of something in his eyes. "That's where I come in. I can secure the funds. And you," he paused, his gaze meeting hers. "You have the vision. Together, we'll be unstoppable." Serena took a deep breath, the weight of his offer sinking in. She had always been independent, always believed in doing things on her own. But this could be different. Luca wasn't just offering money or resources. He was offering something else, a partnership, a chance to truly make an impact. The conversation shifted to logistics, the practical details of launching their vision into reality. But beneath the surface, there was a new tension. Every word, every glance, carried with it an unspoken promise this partnership could become something more than just business. It was late when they finally left the cafe, the cool night air greeting them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. Serena glanced at Luca, her mind racing with the possibilities of their nonprofit. They had a long road ahead, but for the first time in weeks, Serena felt hopeful. They stood at the curb, waiting for their rides. The silence between them was comfortable, but it wasn't the same as before. Now, there was an undercurrent of something more, a spark that neither of them was willing to acknowledge. Luca turned to her, his expression serious. "Serena, I want you to know this is more than just business for me." Serena's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. "I know," she said quietly, her voice betraying none of the nerves she felt. Luca stepped closer, his proximity sending a ripple of heat through her. "I think you're amazing, Serena. You've changed everything, and you're only just beginning." Serena swallowed hard, her mind racing. The intensity of his gaze was almost overwhelming, but she didn't want to back down. "Not yet. We're not done yet," she said, her voice low but firm. "We've got a long way to go." There was a long pause. Luca didn't take his eyes off her, and Serena didn't look away either. She could feel the tension between them, thick and undeniable. The moment lingered just a little too long, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it ended. Their rides pulled up, and they exchanged a brief, businesslike handshake. But as Serena slid into the car, her heart was still racing. 2 days later, Serena met Luca again, this time at a private event, an exclusive gathering of business leaders and philanthropists. The evening was formal and elegant, but Serena felt like she was floating through the crowd. She was used to these events, but tonight, her attention kept drifting to Luca. He had been distant for the past 2 days, but she could feel something shifting. She found him by the window, his silhouette framed against the city lights. Without thinking, she walked over to him. He turned as she approached, his face breaking into a small smile. "You look different tonight," he said, his voice warm, but with a hint of something deeper. Serena tilted her head, curious. "How do I look?" "Like you're ready to conquer the world," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Her pulse quickened. There was something in the way he said, "It is something more than admiration." She was suddenly very aware of the closeness between them, of the heat that seemed to emanate from his body. Before she could respond, he took a step closer, his hand brushing against hers. The touch sent a jolt through her, unexpected but undeniable. Serena's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch. This wasn't just a partnership anymore. This was something else. Something neither of them could control. "Luca," Serena began, her voice a whisper, but he didn't let her finish. He leaned in slightly, his face inches from hers. "I don't want to rush this," he said, his voice low, "but I can't deny what's between us." Serena's heart raced as she met his gaze. The air between them crackled with electricity. And then, just as their lips were about to meet, a voice from across the room interrupted them. The glassy surface of the lake reflected the pale blue of the sky as Ashley stood at the water's edge, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. It was a Saturday afternoon, the air thick with the kind of humidity that made everything feel sticky. The small park near her apartment was unusually quiet, the kind of peaceful silence that gave space for thoughts to settle in. Ashley hadn't expected this moment to come so soon. It was a conversation she'd avoided for weeks, ever since the fallout with Serena. She had pushed it to the back of her mind, telling herself that time would heal it, that maybe things would work themselves out. But today, the realization hit her. She had to face it, face Serena. Ashley could hear footsteps approaching behind her, and when she turned, she saw Serena walking toward her, her expression guarded but curious. Dressed in a loose shirt and comfortable pants, Serena looked unbothered by the humidity, her long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The two women locked eyes for a moment. The tension between them was palpable. Serena had every right to be angry with her, and Ashley knew that she had no excuses left. No more platitudes or empty words. This had to be real. "I've been thinking a lot," Ashley said, her voice low and tentative. Serena raised an eyebrow, her lips curving slightly in a skeptical half-smile. "I can tell." Ashley took a deep breath. She had rehearsed this apology 100 times in her head, but the weight of it still felt like a heavy stone in her chest. "Serena, I need to apologize for what happened before, for how I acted, for how I treated you." Serena didn't respond right away. She just stood there, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her gaze never leaving Ashley. Ashley felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She wasn't sure what kind of apology Serena wanted. She wasn't sure what kind of apology she deserved. "I was so wrapped up in my own world," Ashley continued, her words flowing out in a rush. "I didn't see how my actions were hurting you. I didn't understand the impact of my privilege. I was blind to it, and I'm sorry for that. Serena's expression softened slightly, but she didn't immediately respond. There was a long pause, as if she were weighing the sincerity of Ashley's words. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. You can't just apologize, Ashley. You can't just say, I'm sorry, and expect everything to go back to normal. It's more than that. You need to understand why you did what you did and how it affected me. Ashley nodded, her eyes earnest. I know, and I'm trying. I'm doing the work, but I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see you. Serena looked away for a moment, staring out at the water, the tension between them lingering. Then, with a deep breath, she finally spoke. It's not easy, Ashley. It's not easy to forgive someone who doesn't even see their own privilege. But I can see that you're trying, and that counts for something. Ashley's heart lifted at her words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The dimly lit lounge had a cozy, intimate feel to it, and the air was thick with the scent of bourbon and cigars. Serena sat at a small table near the window, looking out over the city skyline. The lights of the buildings shimmered below, and she could hear the faint hum of the bustling streets. She was grateful for the quiet, grateful for the escape from the whirlwind of meetings and events. Luca had invited her here after an intense day of discussing their nonprofit project. They had spent hours poring over logistics, the strategies, and the mission, but now, as the evening stretched on, there was a different kind of energy between them. Luca slid into the seat across from her, his eyes glinting under the low light. His smile was knowing, but there was something more to it tonight, something warmer. I have to admit, he said, his voice low and teasing, I'm glad we're finally getting a break from the seriousness. I was beginning to think you didn't know how to relax. Serena raised an eyebrow, half smiling. I know how to relax. I just don't do it often. Well, I'm glad to provide you with an opportunity, Luca replied smoothly. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that felt different than before. There was no pretense now, just an unspoken connection. She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. You're not as serious as you want everyone to think, are you? Luca's eyes sparkled with amusement. Is that what you think? I think you're just like the rest of us, Serena said softly. You have a mission, but you're human too. The words hung between them, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. The world outside the window seemed distant, as if the only thing that mattered was the space between their two bodies. Tell me something, Luca said after a beat, his voice quieter now. How does it feel, knowing that you're finally making the change you've always wanted? Serena's breath caught in her throat at the sincerity in his question. It was unexpected, but it was also exactly what she needed to hear. It feels exhausting, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And sometimes it feels impossible, but it also feels like I'm finally doing something that matters. Like I'm not just wasting time anymore. Luca's gaze softened, and there was a moment of silence. Then, as if caught in the same current, he reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was brief, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Serena's heart skipped a beat. She looked up at him, her pulse racing. Luca smiled, his lips curling slightly. Then let's make sure we don't waste it. The following week, Serena found herself sitting across from Ashley once again. This time, the conversation was different, less formal, more open. They were meeting in a quiet cafe, far from the usual whirlwind of work and obligations. It was just the two of them, and for the first time, there was a sense of mutual understanding between them. I know you're trying, Serena said, stirring her coffee slowly. But sometimes, it feels like I'm fighting a battle that nobody sees. Ashley looked at her. Her expression softened. I understand that now, she said quietly. I get it. I've never had to face what you face. I've never had to worry about being treated differently because of something I can't control. Serena's eyes flickered with something close to pain, but she kept her voice steady. You don't realize how exhausting it is until you're in it every single day. The looks, the assumptions, the constant need to prove yourself. Ashley's heart tightened as she listened. She had known this intellectually, but hearing it from Serena made it real in a way she hadn't expected. She reached across the table, her hand hovering over Serena's for a moment before gently making contact. I'm sorry, Ashley said again, the words more sincere than they'd ever been. I can't pretend to know what you've been through, but I want to understand. I really do. Serena met her gaze, her eyes searching, and then, slowly, she nodded. It's not easy, but it's better when we're on the same side. The two women sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling between them. There was still much to work through, but this moment of understanding felt like a step in the right direction. The air was thick with anticipation when Serena and Luca met again. It was another evening, another quiet moment between the two of them, but tonight was different. Their connection had deepened in ways neither of them had expected. They stood in the lobby of a hotel, the soft hum of the elevator filling the silence between them. Serena had just finished a call, her mind spinning with work. Luca had been quiet for the past few minutes, but when he looked at her, it felt as if he was looking right through her. I've been thinking, he said softly, his voice like velvet. About what? Serena asked, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. About how much I want this, Luca replied, his gaze intense, his tone deliberate. He took a step closer to her, the air between them electric. Serena's heart raced as his words sank in. She knew what he was talking about. She could feel it too, the undeniable pull. But the timing, the stakes, everything was complicated. I don't know if it's the right time, Serena murmured, her breath catching. Luca didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, Sometimes there's no perfect time, Serena. There's only now. And then, without thinking, he kissed her gently but full of promise. The kiss lingered, soft and tender, a quiet spark in the heavy silence of the hotel lobby. Serena felt her heart skip, her thoughts momentarily scattered by the warmth of Luca's touch. His lips were gentle against hers, but the intensity in the moment was undeniable. It was a kiss that spoke volumes, more than either of them had been ready to admit, but it was also a kiss filled with hesitation. It wasn't just about the immediate connection. It was about everything that came before and everything that lay ahead. When they finally pulled apart, the air between them felt charged. Serena's chest rose and fell with every breath, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. The chemistry that had built between them over the past weeks was now undeniable, but there were layers to their relationship that neither of them had fully acknowledged. I don't know what this means, Serena said, her voice barely above a whisper as she stepped back slightly, the reality of the moment hitting her. She ran a hand through her hair, trying to ground herself. Luca's gaze softened, his eyes lingering on her face, tracing the curve of her jaw, as if trying to memorize the details. I don't either, he admitted quietly. His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed something else, something deeper. But I know what I feel right now, and that's enough for me. Serena's mind was a whirl of emotions. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to give in to this sudden connection, to let it sweep her away. But everything she stood for, everything she was working toward, felt like it was on the line. She had fought so hard to carve out a space for herself, to make sure that her mission, her work, was never overshadowed by anything else. And Luca, with his power, his influence, was a reminder of everything she'd been fighting against. She had built walls for a reason. She took a deep breath, pulling herself together. But you have to understand, Luca, she said slowly, her gaze meeting his with a quiet intensity. I'm not just trying to change the way people see each other in the travel industry. I'm trying to change everything. This isn't just a project for me. It's personal. I can't get distracted. Luca listened quietly, nodding slightly as if understanding the weight of her words. He didn't take his eyes off her, his expression calm but searching. I understand. More than you think. I've been in your shoes, fighting for something, always questioning if you'll get the chance to finish what you started. Serena studied him carefully, the uncertainty in her eyes slowly fading. She could see the sincerity in his gaze, the vulnerability behind his usual confident exterior. There was a part of her that wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the others, that he didn't see her as just another project, another cause to win. She stepped back again, her heart racing in her chest, trying to fight off the growing pull between them. "But there's something I need to figure out first," she said, her voice barely audible. Luca didn't rush her. He simply nodded, his hand finding its way to her arm, his touch light but firm. "I'm not going anywhere, Serena. Take your time. I'm here for you, for whatever comes next. We'll figure this out together." His words, the way he spoke them with such certainty, both comforted her and terrified her at the same time. She was torn between the ambition that had driven her for so long and the feeling that Luca might be the missing piece she hadn't known she needed. "I need to think," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to figure out where this fits, where you fit in all of this." Luca's fingers brushed against her wrist, a brief but meaningful gesture. He didn't try to stop her or pressure her. Instead, he simply offered a small, understanding smile, one that spoke volumes without saying a word. "I understand," he said softly. "Whenever you're ready." Serena stood there, still processing everything, the kiss, the connection, the weight of her own mission, and for the first time in a long while, she realized just how much was at stake. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but she knew that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. As she turned to walk away, the lingering sensation of Luca's touch on her arm stayed with her. The tension between them was far from resolved, but in that moment, it was clear that whatever happened next, neither of them would be the same. Serena stood before the glass walls of her office, the city stretching out before her in a sea of skyscrapers and busy streets. It had been months since the public backlash against the airline had started, months of meetings, protests, and negotiations. The weight of it all was starting to feel heavy, but today, as she stared at the final draft of the new policies on her desk, there was a sense of triumph in the air. The new diversity and inclusion policies, aimed at eliminating racial bias and increasing representation in leadership roles, were officially set to be rolled out. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but to Serena, it felt monumental. She had fought tooth and nail for this moment, and now it was finally here. But there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from over. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Luca's name. Her chest tightened for a moment. He had been a constant presence in her life lately. Their relationship had been evolving in unexpected ways, but this was different. This was about something bigger than both of them. "Hey, Luca," Serena answered, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. "Hey, Serena. I know this is a huge moment for you, but I just got off the phone with a few investors. There's a lot of pressure on you. They want results, not just talk. Are you ready for this?" His voice was calm, but there was a note of concern there, a reminder of how high the stakes were. Serena bit her lip, leaning back in her chair. "I'm ready. I've been ready for this my whole life." She heard him exhale on the other end of the line. "Just remember, you're not alone in this. You've got me, and we're in this together." She smiled, the weight on her shoulders lightening just a little. "Thanks, Luca. I appreciate it, but I have to go. I have a meeting with the board in an hour. I'll be here," he said, before the line went quiet. As she hung up the phone, Serena looked at the policies once more. She had spent sleepless nights fighting for these changes, but the reality of systemic change was that it didn't come easily. There would be resistance, both internal and external. But Serena was no stranger to that. She was ready for what came next. Her office door opened and Ashley stepped in, a worried expression on her face. The promotion Ashley had received to the leadership team wasn't without its challenges, and it showed. Serena watched as she hesitated in the doorway, unsure if she was ready to face the confrontation they both knew was inevitable. "Serena," Ashley said, her voice carefully controlled, "we need to talk." Serena nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "I know we do." The silence between them was thick, filled with the weight of their past actions, their unresolved tension. Ashley had been an obstacle in Serena's fight for change, but now she was part of the team, the very team that had to execute these changes. It was awkward, to say the least. "We're in this together now," Serena said, breaking the silence. "We have to be." Ashley nodded, sitting down slowly. "I've been thinking about a lot of things lately. I can't ignore my past, my privilege, what I did, how I acted, and it's all catching up to me now." Serena raised an eyebrow. "You're not the only one." There was a long pause. Serena could see Ashley wrestling with her own internal struggle. She had done damage. She had hurt people. But now, she was being asked to lead the charge for change. It wasn't an easy task for anyone, but for someone with a history like Ashley's, it was even harder. "I want to make things right," Ashley said, her voice quieter now. "I know I have a lot to prove, but I'm willing to do the work. I have to. I don't want to be part of the problem anymore." Serena studied her, the softening in her tone not lost on her. She wasn't sure if Ashley was truly ready to change, or if this was just the pressure of her new role. But she had to give her a chance. They both did. "Then let's do this," Serena said, the words coming easier than she thought. "We have work to do, and it starts with us." Ashley's eyes met hers, and there was something unspoken between them, a recognition of the challenges ahead, but also a new sense of understanding. Serena had been angry for so long, but in this moment, she realized that anger couldn't be the driving force anymore. It had to be something more. Serena nodded toward the door. "Let's get to it." As Ashley left the office, Serena turned back to the window. The world outside was bustling, unaware of the changes that were about to unfold. But Serena knew this was just the beginning. The boardroom was tense as Serena entered, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She had been a part of countless meetings like this one, but today felt different. The air was thick with expectation. The new policies were about to be presented to the board, and Serena knew this was the moment of reckoning. She took her seat at the head of the table, looking around at the faces of the powerful men and women who had the authority to either support or destroy everything she had worked for. They were looking to her now, waiting for her to prove that the changes were more than just words on a piece of paper. "We're here today to discuss the new diversity and inclusion policies," Serena began, her voice steady, confident. "This is not just a company initiative. This is a movement to change the very fabric of how we operate, how we treat people, how we value every person who walks through our doors." She watched as their eyes shifted, some with skepticism, others with interest. This was her moment to make them believe that change was possible, that it was necessary. "We have done the research," she continued, her gaze moving around the room. "We've listened to employees, customers, and industry experts. These policies are built on facts, not feelings. They will make us a stronger, more diverse company. They will change how we hire, how we promote, and how we create an inclusive environment where everyone belongs." One of the board members, a tall man in his late 50s, cleared his throat. "And how will we ensure that this isn't just lip service?" he asked, his tone sharp. "How do we hold people accountable for these changes?" Serena met his gaze. "We hold ourselves accountable. We create measurable goals, track progress, and make sure these policies are not just implemented but integrated into every part of our operations. And we hire the right people who are committed to making this change a reality." There was a pause. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for someone to speak up. Finally, another board member, a woman in her 40s with dark hair and sharp features, leaned forward. "And what about the backlash?" "This will ruffle feathers, Serena. It will upset a lot of people. How do we handle that?" Serena took a breath, her confidence unwavering. We embrace it. We don't back down. We stand firm in our commitment to diversity and inclusion, even if it's uncomfortable. Change is never easy, but it's necessary. And the more resistance we face, the more we know we're on the right track. The silence in the room stretched on, but there was a shift. A subtle nod from the man at the end of the table. A slight glance of agreement from the woman across from Serena. It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was enough. Enough to know that the fight wasn't over yet, but Serena was winning. Ashley sat at her desk, the pile of paperwork in front of her a constant reminder of her new role. She had worked hard to get here, but now that she was in this position, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was out of her depth. The new policies were in full swing, and as the newly appointed head of diversity and inclusion, it was her job to make sure they worked. But every day, she was confronted with her own biases, the ones she had spent years ignoring or pretending didn't exist. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Serena. Asterisk, check your inbox. Important asterisk. Ashley sighed, wiping a hand over her face. She knew Serena was right. The work wasn't just about policies or programs. It was about changing how people thought, how they acted. And Ashley wasn't sure she was ready to lead that kind of change. But then she looked at the email from Serena, the one that included a personal message about their upcoming speech at the International Diversity Conference. Serena was counting on her. The company was counting on her. Ashley gritted her teeth, picking up the phone to call her mentor. It was time to figure out how to make this work, how to face her own shortcomings and become the leader she needed to be. Serena stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The audience was waiting, the room buzzing with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This speech wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who had ever been overlooked, discriminated against, or told they didn't belong. Stepping onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was deafening, but she barely noticed it. All she could focus on was the words she had prepared, the message she had to deliver. This is not just about corporate policies, Serena said, her voice strong and clear. This is about justice. This is about giving every person the same opportunity, the same respect, and the same chance to succeed. It's about dismantling the systems that have held so many of us back for so long. The audience was silent now, hanging on every word. Serena could feel the power of the moment. She had come so far, fought so hard, and now, finally, her voice was being heard. But as the speech drew to a close, Serena received a strange message on her phone. It was an anonymous number. Her stomach twisted as she opened the message. It was short but chilling. Stop pushing for change, or your life will be exposed. Her blood ran cold. Serena's hand shook as she stared at the screen, the words still burning in her mind. She knew this was a threat, a warning from someone who didn't want to see change, someone who would do anything to stop her. The room around her seemed to close in, the weight of the message heavy in her chest. She had fought so hard to get to this point, and now it felt like everything was on the line. She glanced over at Luca, who was watching her closely from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but there was a concern in his eyes. "Serena," he asked, his voice low. "What's wrong?" She didn't have time to answer. The message, the threat, it was real. And it was only the beginning. As Serena's mind raced, she knew that the fight wasn't just about changing the airline anymore. It was about protecting everything she had built, everything she believed in. And whoever was behind this message, they were going to find out just how far she was willing to go. Serena had not slept. The words in that anonymous message had gnawed at her for hours. Her phone screen felt like a burning reminder of the danger lurking just beneath the surface. She paced the floor of her apartment, the city lights blinking through the windows, but the world outside seemed distant. She needed answers. Luca was already waiting for her at the small cafe they'd been frequenting, his coffee long gone and replaced by a new cup as he watched her walk in. He stood up, his presence solid, unwavering. "Any word?" Serena asked, sitting down across from him, not waiting for pleasantries. She needed to know what they were dealing with. "I have someone looking into it," Luca said, leaning forward slightly. His face, usually so controlled, now carried the tension of someone about to dive into something dangerous. He wasn't scared, but he wasn't foolish either. But I don't like this. It's more than just a random threat. This is calculated. Serena's stomach twisted. She had been expecting this. But hearing it from Luca made it real. The conspiracy she had feared, the one she had only hinted at, was unfolding. I know, she said, staring at the tabletop. I can feel it. Someone wants me out of the picture, and they're not going to stop until they get it. There was silence between them for a moment, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Luca wasn't one to mince words. His loyalty to Serena had never been in question, but this was dangerous. He wasn't sure how far he could push without losing everything. You have to be careful, he said, his voice soft, but with a razor-sharp edge. They're not playing by the same rules. Whoever is behind this won't hesitate to expose everything. Your personal life, your career. Hell, they might even try to ruin your reputation. Serena's jaw tightened. Let them. I'm not backing down. Luca hesitated, then placed his hand on top of hers, his fingers warm against her cold skin. You don't have to do this alone. You've got me. We'll face this together. She nodded slowly. The warmth of his touch grounded her, but the weight of the world still pressed down on her shoulders. I can't keep waiting for them to strike first. I need to know who's behind this, and I need to know now. Luca stood up, his chair scraping against the floor as he looked out the window. The city looked peaceful from here, unaware of the storm brewing below the surface. But Serena knew better than to let appearances fool her. We'll find them, he said, his voice low, determined. I'll get someone on the inside. We'll get to the bottom of this. I won't let them destroy everything you've worked for. Serena met his gaze. There was no turning back now. She would fight this, with every ounce of strength she had. The next day, the attack came. It was subtle at first, an anonymous post on social media, targeting Serena's past, digging up old interviews and photos. It wasn't anything illegal, just insinuations and half-truths designed to undermine her credibility. But Serena knew it was only the beginning. She sat in her office, scrolling through the post, her face hardening as the words blurred together. The message was clear. She's not who she says she is. She's a fraud, a dangerous threat to the company. Luca had warned her that they would try to destroy her reputation. But this felt different. This felt personal. Have you seen this? Serena said, looking up at Ashley, who had just entered the room. Ashley's face was pale, her brows furrowed as she scanned the screen. I've seen it, Ashley replied, her voice tight. This is an attack. It's not just about you anymore. They're going after everything we've worked for. Serena nodded, her fingers tapping on the desk. It's a smear campaign. They want the public to question my integrity, to make me look like a liability. Ashley's jaw clenched. I'll handle this. They can't get away with it. Serena looked at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. You'll handle it? I won't stand by and let them destroy you, Ashley said, her eyes meeting Serena's. You've given me the chance to prove myself, to fix my mistakes. I'm not going to let this company or my reputation be dragged through the mud because of a few people who want to keep things the way they are. Serena stood up slowly, the weight of the decision settling on her. I can't fight this alone, but I can't afford to lose you either. Ashley nodded firmly. I'm with you, all the way. The two women locked eyes, a new understanding between them. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about something deeper, something they were both willing to fight for. Luca had never been one to show weakness, but as he leaned against the railing outside Serena's apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. The deeper he dug into the conspiracy, the more tangled it became. Powerful people were involved, people with resources he couldn't track down. He had always been good at playing the game, at knowing which moves to make, which people to trust. But this was different. There was a cold, calculated nature to the enemy that made him uneasy. A text from Serena broke his thoughts. It was short, to the point. "We need to talk." Luca exhaled sharply, sending a quick reply. "I'm on my way." When he arrived, Serena was waiting for him at the door. There was no smile, no pleasantries, just the weight of what they were facing. Her expression was resolute, but Luca could see the fatigue in her eyes. "We can't wait anymore," Serena said, her voice low. "We need to go on the offensive. I'm done playing defense." Luca nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. The longer we wait, the more they'll spread the lies. We can't let them control the narrative." Serena leaned against the kitchen counter, her arms crossed. "I need your help. We need to expose them, show the world who's behind this smear campaign. I don't care what it costs." Luca moved closer, his hand resting on the counter beside her. "You've got it. Whatever it takes." Her gaze softened just for a moment, but it was enough. "Thank you. You've always been there for me. I won't forget that." Luca's hand brushed against hers as he turned to leave. His touch was brief, but it lingered in the air between them, heavy with unspoken words. "Don't worry," he said, his voice steady. "We'll take them down together." Ashley paced in the empty conference room, the walls closing in around her as she prepared for the press conference. The smear campaign had reached new heights, and the pressure to publicly defend Serena was building. The media had been relentless, and now it was her turn to face the storm. She could feel the eyes of the reporters on her even before the doors opened. She had been thrust into the spotlight, a position she hadn't asked for, but one that she couldn't back down from. She had already made her mistakes in the past. This time, she wasn't going to let anyone drag Serena through the mud. The room was silent as she stepped up to the podium, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the crowd, her gaze landing on the cameras and reporters, all waiting for her to speak. The question was clear. Would she stand by Serena, or would she crumble under the pressure? Taking a deep breath, Ashley leaned into the microphone. "I'm here today to set the record straight. There's been a lot of misinformation about Serena's leadership, about the changes she's pushing for, and I'm here to tell you that she's doing the right thing. The changes she's fighting for are necessary. They're long overdue." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "I've made mistakes in the past, and I've learned from them. I'm not perfect, but I stand by Serena. She's the leader we need right now, and I'm proud to be part of this journey." The room erupted into murmurs, but Ashley stood tall, her voice unwavering. She could feel the weight of the decision settling in her chest, but she was finally ready to embrace the responsibility. Serena sat in her office, reviewing the latest developments, when her phone buzzed. Another anonymous message this time. It was different. The source was clear. It was someone inside the company. She opened the message, her eyes scanning the words quickly. "I know who's behind the campaign. It's not just a smear. It's a coordinated effort to take you down. Meet me in the parking garage at 9 p.m. I'll show you everything." Serena's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a threat. This was an invitation to a showdown, a confrontation that could either destroy her or give her the weapon she needed to expose the conspiracy once and for all. She glanced at the clock. It was almost time. The day Serena had fought for finally arrived. The boardroom was packed with executives, their faces a mixture of tension and anticipation. The weight of the moment hung in the air, but Serena stood tall, a quiet storm of confidence. She had spent years pushing for change, for diversity and inclusion in an industry that had been stagnant for far too long. Today, her efforts would either be recognized or discarded. Luca stood by the side of the room, a silent force behind her. He had always been there, but today he wasn't just her ally. He was a symbol of the battle they had fought together, shoulder to shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Serena began, her voice steady but commanding, "this is the moment where we make history. The airline industry has ignored the calls for change for too long. We have a responsibility, not just as business leaders, but as people, to ensure that the future we're building is one of equality, representation, and opportunity for all. She paused, letting her words sink in. The faces around the table remained unreadable, but Serena could feel the shift. There was a crack in the old guard, a subtle shift toward something better. She had seen the power of resistance, but now she was seeing the quiet, inevitable power of transformation. After months of research, community outreach, and negotiation, she continued, "We are here today to present a groundbreaking diversity program. This isn't just about ticking boxes. This is about shaping the future of aviation and setting a new standard for what it means to be inclusive in every aspect of our work, at every level." As Serena spoke, the tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet buzz of realization. The tide was turning. The board members exchanged glances, some nodding, others still cautious. But the message had been delivered. Serena had earned their respect, not with flashy promises, but with her unwavering commitment to the cause. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The airline would implement a series of long-term diversity programs. Serena had done it. Her victory was not just personal. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or excluded. As the meeting came to a close, Serena allowed herself a brief moment of relief. But before she could fully exhale, Luca approached her, his smile genuine but tinged with a shared exhaustion. "You did it," he said, his voice low. His eyes held more than admiration. There was something deeper, something that had been building between them since the beginning. Serena looked up at him, her breath catching in her chest. For a moment, she didn't know whether she was standing in the midst of her triumph or at the edge of something entirely new, something that had always been there, waiting. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied softly. Luca's smile deepened, and for the first time, Serena saw something more in his eyes than just support. There was a warmth, a tenderness that hadn't been there before. He took a step closer, his presence a magnetic pull. "You never had to," he whispered. The sun was setting over the city as Serena walked down the street with Luca beside her. The weight of the day was still heavy on her shoulders, but there was a sense of lightness between them now, a shift that neither of them could deny. They had both fought battles, but now they were standing on the other side, having won more than just a professional victory. Luca walked in step with her, his arm brushing against hers with every movement. It wasn't a gesture that felt forced or calculated. It was natural, like they had both been waiting for the right moment to let the walls they had built between them fall. "So, what now?" Serena asked, glancing up at him. Her tone was casual, but the undercurrent of possibility was there. Luca smiled, a flicker of something more in his eyes. Now we keep fighting. There's still a long way to go, and we both know that." Serena nodded, her fingers lightly brushing the side of his hand. It wasn't intentional, but it was enough to make both of them pause. She felt the heat between them, a quiet, undeniable pull that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. She turned to face him fully, her heart beating just a little faster. And after that, Luca's expression softened, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. "After that," he said quietly, we live. We live in the world we've fought for." Serena felt something stir inside her, a wave of emotion she hadn't been prepared for. "Together?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luca reached out, his hand gently cupping her face. The touch was tender, like a promise. Together, Ashley had spent weeks working alongside Serena, learning what it truly meant to fight for change. She had made her mistakes, but she had also redeemed herself in a way that no one had expected. Her role in the company had shifted, and now, as she stood in front of a crowd at a diversity panel, she felt a weight she hadn't felt before, a responsibility to continue the work Serena had started. It wasn't easy. It never had been. But Ashley had found a new sense of purpose, one that was rooted in making sure that the company and the world would never again forget the value of diversity and inclusion. She looked out over the audience, her voice steady as she spoke. "We cannot be complacent. We cannot allow ourselves to be content with surface-level diversity. True inclusion means creating an environment where everyone, no matter their background, can thrive. It means supporting our colleagues and our communities in ways that are meaningful, not just performative. The crowd responded with nods and applause, but Ashley knew that the work wasn't over. It was just beginning. She would continue to fight, to push, and to challenge the systems that sought to keep things the same. But now, she wasn't doing it alone. She had the support of Serena and the respect of everyone who had doubted her. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that only existed when everything had been said and done. Serena stood by the window of her apartment, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled below her like stars in the distance, but her thoughts were with Luca. He had been a constant in her life, a source of strength, but now something between them had changed. It was more than just respect, more than just admiration. It was love. Luca entered the room quietly, his footsteps soft against the hardwood floor. When Serena turned to face him, he was standing only a few feet away, his eyes dark with unspoken words. "Serena," he began, his voice low but steady, "I've never been good at this, at saying what I feel. But I need you to know this." He gestured between them. "This is more than just a partnership. More than just us fighting for a cause. I've wanted you for a long time." Serena felt a warmth spread through her, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew where this was going, but hearing it from him, hearing the truth of his feelings, felt like a revelation. "I've wanted you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Luca stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Then let's stop pretending we don't feel it." Without another word, he reached for her, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was soft but full of promise. For a moment, the world outside faded away. All that mattered was the quiet certainty that they had found something in each other that was worth fighting for. The morning after, Serena and Luca sat together in the quiet of the early hours, sipping coffee as the sun began to rise. There was a peace between them now, a sense of quiet understanding. Their fight wasn't over, but they were no longer fighting alone. Ashley joined them shortly after, a smile on her face as she sat down across from them. It was clear she was on her own journey now, a journey that was far from over, but one that had already begun to take root. Serena met Ashley's gaze, her smile warm and knowing. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Ashley's smile widened and she nodded. "Yeah, but this is just the beginning. There's more work to do." Luca placed his hand over Serena's, squeezing it gently. "And we'll do it together." The three of them sat in silence, the weight of the world no longer an obstacle but a shared mission. And as they looked out over the horizon, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it united together, stronger than ever before. Thanks for watching. What do you think? Let us know in the comment below. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more interesting stories.